This happened to me in late 2023, when I was 24 and working my first real full-time office job. I'd just been hired as a junior analyst at a mid-size logistics company in Chicago, the kind of place that sounds boring on paper but feels like a huge step when you're just starting out. I still remember the feeling of walking through those glass doors with my new ID badge, trying to look like I knew what I was doing while my stomach twisted with nerves. The office itself looked like every modern collaborative space you see on LinkedIn. Open-plan desks, glass meeting rooms with inspirational words etched on the walls, fake plants everywhere, and big windows looking out over the city. They advertised it as this bright, friendly environment, but for me it also meant you never really got a moment alone. Every move you made, every awkward first-day mistake, felt like it was happening under a spotlight. On my first day, my manager walked me around, doing the usual awkward introductions. Most people barely glanced up from their screens, muttering quick "hey" or "welcome aboard" before going back to whatever spreadsheet was slowly killing them. I felt invisible and exposed at the same time, like a new kid in a school where everyone already had their friend groups locked in. Then she introduced me to the person who was supposed to show me the ropes. His name was Tom. He was in his mid-30s, average height, dark hair that was just starting to thin on top, and a permanently tired kind of smile. He cracked a couple of dad jokes, pointed out where the good snacks were hidden, and helped me log into all the systems. Unlike everyone else, he made eye contact, laughed, and actually seemed interested in making me feel welcome. He told me if I ever needed anything, "I'm your guy," and in that moment, I believed him. At first, I was honestly grateful Tom existed. Being new is scary, and having someone who already knows the unspoken rules of the office can feel like a lifeline. He would pop by my desk regularly, asking if I needed help with a report, or if I wanted him to show me how we usually format emails here. He'd walk me through how they log tasks, how to phrase certain messages so managers didn't get annoyed, and which tools everyone actually used versus what the company pretended they used. But after a couple of weeks, it stopped feeling like support and started feeling like surveillance. If I got up to grab coffee, he would suddenly appear beside me, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. If I went to the break room, he was already there leaning on the counter. When I logged into a shared spreadsheet, I'd see his little user icon join within seconds, almost like he'd been watching for my activity. It went from helpful to constant, from comforting to claustrophobic, and I didn't quite know when that shift happened. One Friday afternoon, I stayed a bit late to finish a report my manager needed for Monday morning. Most people had already left for the weekend, and the office felt strangely hollow. The buzzing of the lights seemed louder, the clicking of my keyboard echoed more than usual, and the sky outside the windows shifted from bright winter afternoon to a darker, cold blue as the sun went down over the city. I put my headphones in and focused on the last few numbers, telling myself I'd leave as soon as the report was finished. The floor was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant elevator dings from other levels. It felt like the building was slowly emptying, floor by floor, and I was one of the last people left in its stomach. I thought I was alone. I thought staying late was responsible and mature. I didn't realize I was giving someone the perfect chance to watch me without witnesses. When I finally looked up from my screen and pulled out one headphone, I nearly jumped out of my chair. Tom was sitting directly across from me at the empty desk facing mine, his monitor completely turned off. He wasn't typing, he wasn't clicking, he wasn't pretending to work. He was just there, silent, like he had materialized out of nowhere. I hadn't heard his chair move, hadn't heard footsteps, no casual hey or joke to announce himself. Trying to play it off, I laughed awkwardly and said, "God, you scared me. I didn't know anyone else was still here." He slowly turned his head toward me and gave that familiar sleepy smile. Then he said, "I don't like leaving new people alone in the office." I joked back, "So you're my personal bodyguard now?" But he didn't laugh. He just looked past me, eyes flat and distant, and said, "You never know who might come in when it's quiet." The smile stayed on his mouth, but his eyes didn't match. It felt like he was looking at something over my shoulder that I couldn't see, and a chill crawled all the way down my spine. I tried to brush that night off as me overthinking things, but the feeling stayed with me like a stain I couldn't scrub out of my memory. A few days later, something happened that made it worse. At our building entrances, We had ID badge scanners that flashed your name and photo on a small screen. I'd gotten used to the little beep and the quick glimpse of my picture as I came in. One morning, as I scanned in, the older security guard, his name was Lewis, stopped me. He lowered his voice and asked, "You work with Tom a lot, right?" I shrugged and said, "Yeah, he was assigned to train me, why?" Lewis looked genuinely uncomfortable, his eyes flicking toward the hallway like he was afraid someone might overhear. Then he muttered, "Nothing. Just, if he ever makes you uncomfortable, tell HR, all right?" That one sentence stayed with me all morning. I tried to find him later on my lunch break to ask what he meant, but he was gone, replaced by a different guard like he'd never been there at all. That same week, Tom started dropping comments that made my skin crawl. One morning, as I was getting settled at my desk, he walked by casually and said, "I saw your light on late last night." I frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" He smiled in that familiar tired way and said, "Your apartment. That big window over the parking lot? I was driving by and noticed you were still up. You should sleep more." My heart started pounding in my chest. I had never told him where I lived. Not the street, not the building, not even which neighborhood. The only way he could know that detail about my apartment window was if he'd followed me home at some point. Maybe once. Maybe more than once. I laughed it off like it was nothing, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside I felt sick. I tried to force myself to accept the idea that it might be a coincidence, that we just happened to live near each other. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what was happening. Everything changed when the emails started. At work, we used Outlook, and my inbox was always full of the usual corporate junk, policy updates, team announcements, calendar invites I didn't care about. But one Monday morning, there was a new message from a personal Gmail account. No name, just a weird address that looked like random letters and numbers. The subject line read, "You shouldn't trust everyone at work." The body of the email was short, just 2 lines. "The man who sits near you doesn't go home. He just changes rooms." That was it. No signature, no context, nothing. I assumed it was spam or some bizarre phishing attempt and deleted it, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping across my mind. But the very next day, another email came from the same address. This one said, "You should check the conference room cameras at night. But don't tell him I told you." This time, I couldn't ignore it. The wording was too specific. Too targeted. Someone knew about Tom, and about me. Part of me wanted to immediately report the emails to IT, but another part of me was curious and scared in equal measure. We didn't have direct access to security footage, but my manager did. She was the type who loved being in the middle of anything interesting, especially if it involved gossip or drama. So I went into her office and told her that someone had been sending me creepy anonymous emails about our floor after hours. Her eyes lit up as soon as she heard the word creepy. "Creepy how?" she asked, leaning forward. I said, "Like, watching people." I didn't mention Tom's name yet. She called Lewis up from security and asked if we could, purely out of curiosity, see who had been using the conference rooms at night on our floor. Lewis hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but eventually pulled out a small tablet and loaded the overnight footage. Speeding through the hours, we watched our floor sit empty and dark. Then, around 11:30 p.m., we watched someone swipe in and enter the main conference room. Lewis slowed down the footage, and even through the grainy camera quality, I recognized Tom's walk instantly. He walked into the conference room and turned the lights on. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He pulled the blinds closed on the glass walls facing the rest of the office. From the outside camera angle, we couldn't see exactly what he was doing inside. We just watched him pacing around the table, stopping occasionally in one corner, then dragging a rolling chair from the hallway into the center of the room. He sat down in that chair and stared directly at the glass wall, right where the camera was. He didn't move. He didn't check his phone, didn't look at a laptop, didn't shuffle papers. He just stared. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then 20. My manager made a face and said, "That's weird. Maybe he's just decompressing?" But when I looked at Lewis, his eyes said something else. His expression was clear, this isn't normal. I left that office feeling like something had shifted, like I'd crossed from uneasy into genuinely afraid. The third email broke me. It didn't arrive in the morning like the others. It came while I was still at work, at exactly 6:12 p.m., when the office was almost empty and I thought I was alone on the floor finishing a report. The subject line was blank. The body said, "He's behind you now. Don't make it obvious that you know." My whole body went cold. The office was nearly silent, just the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of a computer going to sleep. I sat frozen, staring at my screen, every muscle in my back screaming not to turn around. I used the reflection in my monitor like a mirror, trying to see behind me without moving. At first, I saw nothing, just the glow of overhead lights and the dim hallway. Then I saw a shadow shift near the conference room door. Tom was standing halfway in the doorway, just watching. Not walking toward me, not saying anything. Just standing there, like he was waiting to see what I would do. I didn't think. Instinct took over. I grabbed my bag, hit save on my work without even checking, and half-jogged toward the elevator, muttering something about being late for dinner as I passed him. He didn't say a word. He just stepped out of the way slowly, letting me pass, his eyes following me all the way to the doors. That night, I didn't sleep. The emails, the footage, the way he knew where I lived, it all tangled together in my mind. The next morning, I forwarded every anonymous email to HR and told them everything. They called me in for a confidential conversation. When I sat down, both HR representatives looked tired and serious. One of them slid a printed stack of emails across the table. They were the same messages I'd received, but this time, the sender wasn't a random Gmail. The emails were coming from Tom's work account. "These are from a different address," I said, my voice shaking. "Mine were from Gmail." The HR rep nodded and said, "We know. That's the problem." It turned out I wasn't the first person to report something suspicious about Tom. Another woman who'd already left the company had complained about unwanted surveillance and threatening coded messages. IT traced the anonymous emails back to Tom's computer. He'd been switching between work and fake accounts, sending warnings to multiple women while also being the one they were supposed to fear. He was playing both sides, the stalker and the fake ally. Management suspended him pending investigation, and according to office gossip, he was escorted out by security not long after. I thought that was the end of it. But a couple of weeks later, as I was walking to my car in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. No subject. No text. Just an attachment. I opened it and saw a photo taken from a distance. Me, sitting at my desk, laughing at something on my screen, completely unaware I was being watched. It came from that same random Gmail address. I forwarded it to HR and IT, but they said the account no longer showed up in their logs. It was like it had never existed. I started parking on different levels, having a friend walk me out, and eventually I quit and took a job in another city. To this day, I don't know if that last photo was from Tom, scheduled in advance, or if someone else in the office learned his game and decided to keep it going. When people say your job is like a second home, they never mention that some coworkers never really leave. They just find new ways to watch you. I used to think identity theft was something that happened because you got hacked online, or because you dropped your wallet in a parking lot and a stranger found it. I never imagined it could start with something as boring and ordinary as a printer jam in the office. But that's exactly where my nightmare began. This was in 2022. I was 27 and working as an HR assistant at a mid-sized insurance company. My job wasn't glamorous, but it came with access to some of the most sensitive information you can imagine. Background checks, tax forms, scanned IDs, emergency contacts, all of it. Our HR floor had a dedicated secure printer that only HR staff could use with individual PIN codes. There were 3 of us who used it regularly: my boss, an older woman who was close to retirement, my coworker Dan, and me. Dan was around my age, maybe a couple of years older. He was one of those people who seemed to make friends effortlessly. Easy to talk to, always ready with a joke, the kind of guy who knew everyone's birthday and could fix computers even though it technically wasn't his job. Anytime someone's software glitched or the VPN kicked them out, they'd shout, "Dan, can you look at this?" And he'd walk over, type a few things, and magically fix it. On one Tuesday, I was printing a stack of onboarding forms for a new hire, social security copy, driver's license, standard HR stuff. The printer froze halfway through the job and spat out an error message. Before I could even react, Dan appeared over my shoulder like he'd teleported. "Jammed again," he laughed. "Let me guess, it hates you personally." He opened the side panel, pulled out some crumpled pages, and handed me the stack. I thanked him, grabbed the pile of forms, and went back to my desk, not realizing a single missing page had just become the starting point of something much darker. A week went by. Then two. Everything seemed normal at first, just the usual monotony of HR work, onboarding, offboarding, benefits questions, and a ridiculous amount of emails. Then the first weird thing happened. My bank called me in the middle of a workday, asking if I had applied for a new credit card. I hadn't. I told them no, assuming it was just some glitch or mistaken identity. They flagged the application as suspicious and moved on. I tried to do the same. The second red flag came from my email. I got a password reset notification for a social media account I barely used. Then another one for a streaming service. Then, more disturbingly, one for my personal email account. I was sitting at my HR desk when that one popped up, and I remember feeling a cold prickle run up my spine. To reset my personal email, you'd need access to my phone number or my backup email address, two things that were supposed to be private. That night, I went into full lockdown mode. I changed every password I could think of: bank, email, social media, even old accounts I hadn't used in years. I added two-factor authentication everywhere, set up new security questions, and convinced myself I'd sealed whatever hole my information had slipped through. But there's this awful thing about trying to patch a leak you can't see: you never really know if you fixed it. You just hope. About a month later, my boss called me into her office. She shut the door gently, folded her hands on the desk, and asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" My stomach dropped. "About what?" I asked. She sighed and said, "We've had some concerning reports about unauthorized access to employee files from your account." I told her flat out that I hadn't accessed anything I wasn't supposed to. My boss listened, then rotated her monitor toward me. On the screen was an audit log tied to my user ID, rows of timestamps, file names, IP addresses. At least a dozen employees' files had been opened late at night, copies of IDs, background reports, personal details. All of it supposedly done under my credentials. The timestamps were around 2 or 3 a.m., hours when I was home asleep, not sitting in the office clicking through sensitive files. "I was asleep," I said, trying not to panic. "I swear, I didn't do this." She looked genuinely torn and said, "If your credentials were compromised, that's serious. But IT says there's no sign of a remote login. These accesses all came from inside the building. From your workstation." Hearing that felt like stepping out of my own body. I pictured my empty desk, my cheap office chair, the little plant my sister gave me, my keyboard sitting there in the dark while someone else used my name and password to peel through people's lives. I asked who else had a keycard to the HR floor. My boss said, "Just HR staff." That meant her, me, and Dan. They suspended my system access while IT investigated further. I was still allowed to come into work, but suddenly I was signing in and out like a visitor, and people's eyes followed me in the hallways like they already believed the worst. Dan, of all people, seemed particularly interested in the drama. He leaned on my cubicle wall one day and said, "Man, that's messed up. You should lawyer up or something. They can't just blame you." I told him they had logs that said it was my account. He grinned and said, "Logs can be faked. Trust me, IT people aren't as smart as they think." There was something a little too bright in his eyes when he said it. Over the next week, small things kept happening that made everything worse. One morning, my keycard didn't work on the HR door, and security had to buzz me up. The guard quietly told me my access level had been downgraded. Later, someone from payroll asked, "Hey, did you request a change of address? Our system shows you moved." I hadn't gone anywhere. When I checked my own HR profile, my home address had been replaced with some random apartment across town that I'd never heard of. When I mentioned it to Dan, he laughed and said, "Maybe you've got a secret twin." I tried to joke back, Maybe someone's trying to ruin my life. He just smiled and said, "You're too boring for that." On the outside, it was a joke. On the inside, it felt like a threat wearing a costume. The breaking point came when the police showed up at the office. 2 detectives in plain clothes, badges clipped to their belts. They asked to speak with me in a small conference room away from my department. My boss sat quietly in the corner, hands folded, eyes down. One of the detectives opened a folder and asked, "Do you know a woman named Rachel Torres?" The name sounded familiar, but it took me a minute to place it. When I later checked, I realized she was someone I'd processed onboarding paperwork for, a name in a file, nothing more. The detective explained that Rachel had filed a report saying she'd been receiving threatening, stalking-style messages from a throwaway email account. The sender mentioned personal details, like her home address and the hospital where she was born, details that could only have come from her HR file. I felt physically sick. I told them I had nothing to do with it, that I barely knew who Rachel was. One detective raised a hand and said, "We're not accusing you." Not yet. But the messages came from a VPN, and the only clear digital trail we have points back here, to HR, to your login times, to your access history. They asked if I'd ever given my password to anyone. I said no. They asked if I ever left my workstation unlocked. I had to admit I did, sometimes, during long days when I'd step away for a minute. They asked if anyone in HR had a grudge against Rachel. I said I didn't know her well enough to know that. After they left, my boss told me I was being put on paid leave while the company cooperated fully with the investigation. I packed my things into a cardboard box while my coworkers pretended not to stare. It felt like I'd already been convicted of something I didn't even understand. I don't know what made me do it, but before I left the building for that forced leave, I stopped at the front desk and talked to security. Lewis, the same guard from the other story, was there. I asked him, "Do you keep logs of when doors are opened? Like individual offices?" He nodded and said they did for some areas, including the HR suite. When I asked if he could check my office door for the past week after hours, he looked at me for a long moment, then quietly pulled up the logs. What I saw made my blood run cold. There it was in black and white, 2:07 a.m., HR door opened. 2:09 a.m., my office door opened. 2:34 a.m., my office door closed. 2:36 a.m., HR door closed. And next to each entry was the same keycard ID, Dan Mitchell. I snapped a photo of the screen with my phone before Lewis could stop me. He said he wasn't supposed to show me that, but I think he saw how badly I needed the truth. That night, I forwarded the photo of the logs to my boss and the head of HR, along with a long email connecting everything, the strange bank calls, the password resets, Rachel's harassment, and now the physical evidence that someone had been in my office under Dan's credentials. I didn't sleep at all. I half expected the police to come back, this time with handcuffs. Instead, the next day, I got a phone call from an unknown number. It was Rachel. She told me she'd seen my email because my boss had sent her a copy. She said the messages she'd been getting suddenly stopped the night she mentioned to the police that the company suspected someone other than me. Her voice shook as she explained that whoever was behind it knew personal details about her sister's accident, things that weren't in any file. "I thought it had to be someone close to me," she said. "But now I think it was someone with access to everyone's information." Over the next week, everything exploded. IT dug deeper and found a remote desktop program installed on my office computer, disguised as a harmless PDF manager. It allowed someone else on the network to control my machine while the screen showed a fake screensaver. They traced those hidden connections back to Dan's workstation. Audit logs revealed hidden accounts with admin-level access and logins spoofed to look like mine. Dan had been slowly building backdoors into the HR system for over a year. Police searched his home and found encrypted USB drives holding copies of people's IDs, social security numbers, and bank details. They also found a second prepaid phone tied to the anonymous accounts that had been harassing Rachel and possibly others. Dan had used my credentials as a shield so that if anything blew up, I would look like the careless junior HR assistant who broke everyone's trust. The company quietly settled things, never making a public statement. Internally, they sent an email saying Dan had resigned for personal reasons. My paid leave turned into a weird, uncomfortable return where some people acted like I'd gotten away with something and others avoided me altogether. I quit a few months later. Now, when I think of dangerous coworkers, I don't picture someone stealing my lunch from the fridge. I picture someone smiling, cracking jokes, fixing the printer, and quietly taking my entire life, one copied document at a time. This last story is the one that still keeps me up at night, because it didn't just change how I see my coworkers, it changed how I see myself. I work the night shift at a distribution warehouse. It's a huge concrete building on the edge of an industrial park, with long aisles of metal shelves stacked with boxes and forklifts humming up and down like giant metal insects. At night, the crew is small. 4 or 5 of us plus a supervisor. It always felt a little eerie, but the cameras gave me comfort. Every aisle had one, the office had one, even the loading dock was covered. I told myself that if anything went wrong, there would always be footage to show what happened. At least, that's what I used to believe. One of my coworkers, Jared, was always joking that the cameras were for show, that management didn't actually watch them. He'd say it like he was proud of knowing a secret no one else did. Jared was the veteran of the shift, the guy who'd been there forever and knew where everything was. If a pallet went missing, he could tell you exactly which aisle to check without opening the system. But he lived to push boundaries. He drove the forklift a little too fast, snuck vapes near the dock, and made jokes that regularly brushed the line between teasing and harassment. Our supervisor, Maria, was always threatening him with one more stunt and you're out. He'd just grin, lean back, and say, "You need me too much." I used to think it was just his personality, a harmless troublemaker. I didn't realize he was already treating the cameras like his own personal toys. One night about a year ago, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain, wind howling across the empty parking lot, lightning flashing in the distance. The kind of weather that makes even normal places feel like horror movie settings. The power flickered twice during our shift, and each time the backup generators kicked in, but the lights dimmed just enough to make everything feel unstable. Around 2 a.m., Maria went upstairs to the small office on the second floor to work on inventory reports. That left 4 of us on the floor, me, Jared, and 2 newer guys named Tyler and Nico. At some point, Jared vanished. That wasn't totally unusual, he wandered a lot, but after 20 minutes, Nico looked around and asked, "Where'd he go?" "I need him to unlock cage 3. Tyler shrugged and said, "Probably hiding and scrolling TikTok somewhere." We split up to look for him, walking down different aisles, calling his name. That's when the building stopped feeling like a workplace and started feeling wrong. I took my pallet jack down one of the long aisles, my footsteps echoing off metal racks and cardboard boxes. That's when I heard it, click. A tiny mechanical sound from above. I stopped and looked up at the dome camera mounted at the end of the aisle. It was pointed directly at me. That alone wasn't strange, cameras are supposed to watch people, but something about the way it had just moved, once, precisely as I stopped, made it feel deliberate. I forced myself to keep walking, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then, behind me, I heard another click. I turned around. The camera at the other end of the aisle had also rotated slightly. "Very funny, Jared," I shouted. "I know you're bored, man." There was no answer. No footsteps, no chuckle, nothing. Just the distant hum of the forklifts and the low drone of the generator. I finished my sweep and regrouped with Tyler and Nico near the loading dock. Neither of them had found Jared. Maria was still upstairs with her door closed. Tyler frowned and said, "What if he left? We didn't see him clock out." Nico shook his head and said, "He'd lose his job. Even Jared's not that dumb." We tried radioing Maria, but there was no response. That was weird. She always kept her walkie on. Tyler offered to go upstairs and check on her. He jogged up the metal stairs while Nico and I stayed below. The air felt thicker somehow, like the warehouse was holding its breath. Somewhere way back in the aisles, we heard something metallic scrape slowly across the floor, like a heavy piece of equipment being dragged. When we turned toward the sound, we saw a forklift parked at the end of aisle 12, engine off, driver's seat empty. Nico whispered, "Did you leave that there?" I shook my head. "No. Jared was using it earlier." Before we could process the forklift, we heard Tyler shout from upstairs. It sounded like, "Maria? What are you?" followed by a loud crash and the slam of something heavy. Nico and I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. When we reached the office, the door was locked from the inside. We banged on it, calling their names. "Maria? Tyler? You okay?" No one answered. From inside, we heard a scraping noise, like a chair being dragged across the floor. Then silence. No footsteps, no talking, nothing. My heart hammered in my chest. Nico looked at me, his face pale, and whispered, "Dude, what is happening?" Then, out of nowhere, Jared's voice crackled over the warehouse PA system, distorted and echoing through the aisles. "Everyone to aisle 12, he said in a sing-song tone. "You're going to want to see this." We both jumped. The PA controls were inside Maria's office. There was no way Jared should have had access to them. How did he? Nico started, but I was already running back down the stairs toward aisle 12. The storm outside roared against the walls, and the generator sounded more strained with every passing minute. At the end of aisle 12, strapped to a pallet with duct tape and plastic wrap, was an old computer monitor hooked up to a small security DVR box. Cables ran from it to a nearby outlet. The monitor was already on. The screen showed a grid of camera feeds, all live, all from inside our warehouse, different aisles, the break room, the loading dock, and the office upstairs. One of the feeds showed inside Maria's office. Tyler was standing there, pale and confused, staring up at the tiny camera in the corner. Behind him, the door was closed. On the monitor, we watched Tyler grab the doorknob and try to open it. It didn't move. The camera zoomed in slightly, like someone was controlling it. Jared's distorted voice came through the PA again. "See? They told you the cameras are for safety," he said. "But they never told you who they are really watching." The feeds began cycling. First, we saw ourselves, me and Nico, standing at the end of aisle 12, staring at the monitor. Then it flipped to an empty corner of the warehouse where old equipment was stored. Then the locker room. Then the loading dock. Each camera lingered just long enough for us to notice something was off. A locker door slightly open that we knew had been shut, a rolling ladder parked in a weird spot, a single box turned backwards in a stacked pallet. "I've been watching you for months," Jared said. "Do you know how easy it is to get into the system when the night supervisor keeps her password on a sticky note under her keyboard?" My stomach twisted as the feeds showed older recordings. On one, Maria was seen sitting at her desk earlier that night, laughing at something Jared was saying in the doorway. As she turned to grab a form off the printer, the camera caught him sliding his hand under her keyboard for just a second. "I tried to tell them the cameras were useless," he continued. "So I made them useful." The feed switched back to the office upstairs, only now Maria was tied to her swivel chair, gagged with a strip of tape. Her eyes were furious and terrified. Tyler stood in the corner, hands raised a little, talking to her helplessly. Beside me, Nico whispered, "Jesus Christ. We need to call 911. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The storm had killed the cell service. The only working line was in Maria's office, upstairs, behind a locked door. Jared's voice over the PA changed tone, becoming quieter but somehow more intense. "I know what you think of me," he said. "The idiot. The screw-up. The guy who's one mistake away from getting fired. But I'm the only one who pays attention. I'm the only one who sees what really happens here." The camera feed started showing clips from the past. Maria signing off on double-counted shipments so she could go home early. Tyler sneaking a smoke break inside near flammable materials. Another coworker relabeling a damaged pallet as intact just to avoid paperwork. Then I saw myself. A clip of me skipping a safety check one night because I was exhausted and wanted to get out early. On the screen, in the log, I marked it as complete. It had felt harmless then. Now it was evidence. "You all cut corners," Jared said. "You all lie. You act like I'm the problem, but I'm just the one who keeps the camera rolling." On the office feed, Maria was shaking her head violently, trying to shout through the tape. Then the office lights went out. In the grainy night vision mode, we watched the door behind Tyler slowly open. A figure stepped in wearing a hoodie, face shadowed. Even then, We knew it was Jared. Before Nico could sprint upstairs, I grabbed his arm and muttered, "Don't. You don't know what he's got up there." Jared continued, calm as ever. "Here's the deal," he said. "You have 15 minutes to fix your logs. To correct every lie you've told in the system tonight. To own up. Because at 3 a.m., this entire night's footage goes to corporate, OSHA, and a local news station." A small digital countdown appeared in the corner of the screen, 14:59. The next 15 minutes were chaos. We sprinted to different terminals, pulling up logs and changing entries from OK to failed, adding notes about skipped checks, miscounted inventory, unauthorized breaks. My hands shook as I erased my own lies, knowing Jared was probably watching every keystroke. Somewhere above us, in the dark office, Maria and Tyler sat trapped, staring at that little camera like it was a gun. The timer ticked down, 03:10, 02:45, 01:30. With 30 seconds left, all the camera feeds on the monitor went black. The PA clicked on one last time. "Thanks for participating," Jared said. "Now you know what it's like to live on the other side of the lens." We heard the office door unlock from upstairs. By the time we reached it, Jared was gone. Corporate later called it a security incident orchestrated by a disgruntled employee. They wiped certain footage and installed enhanced monitoring. We all signed new agreements and kept our jobs, but something broke that night. A few weeks later, during another shift, I noticed something strange in the camera rotation. Every 30 seconds or so, between the warehouse shots and office feeds, there was a brief flicker of a different scene, too fast to fully catch. I slowed it down frame by frame on my terminal. It showed a small, dim room with concrete walls, a single chair, and one camera aimed right at it. Sitting in the chair, hands folded, staring directly into the lens, was Jared. He didn't look scared or angry. He looked satisfied, like someone who had finally found the perfect angle. The clip was just 2 seconds long and didn't belong to any official feed. IT called it corrupted data and wiped the system again. But ever since, when the lights hum lower and the storm rattles the loading dock doors, I can't help but glance up at the cameras. Because if Jared taught me anything, it's that the scariest coworker isn't the one you can see. It's the one behind the monitor, deciding what gets recorded and what gets erased.